Ladies of Reddit, how did a guy ruin their chances with you? First red flag was how antsy he was to get me on the phone. Was a friend of a friend on Facebook, so antsy I almost didn't call him. The deal breaker for me was something along the lines of, "You're not like most women, you can actually understand the complex subjects I like to talk about. Most women are too vapid and dull to compete with my intellect." Click. Barf. Gentlemen, if you have to state you're above average in intellect, you aren't. He told me I'd look like I was 13, if not for the wrinkles, managed to insult me for looking too young and too old at the same time. I'm 24, for reference. When I looked offended, he said, "Oh. Don't worry, I like that you kinda look like you're 13. I went out once with someone who brought a pair of glasses to our first date and asked if I would wear them the entirety of our relationship. He already knew I didn't wear glasses, so he had gone ahead and put in fake lenses for me. When I asked why, he said it was because he always imagined himself marrying someone who wore glasses. Also, he told me that he found those glasses on the floor at the movie theater. Lucky me. This is truly the weirdest one. After actively avoiding contact with me for 3 months, he sent me a D-pic at what was 4 a.m. his time Wednesday morning. When I reacted poorly to waking up to this, he called me repeatedly throughout the day until I picked up, at which point he told me that he loved me, in the Tolkienian sense. When I told him to F off, he sent more dicks. Tried negging me at the start of the date, then threw a tantrum when I refused to have sex with him. He actually said I owed him sex because he paid for my movie ticket. Dude, I don't think you could get AH from a sex worker for the price of a movie ticket. First date after meeting online, we went for coffee and he spent the majority of it telling me how we'll move to a big property and how we will raise our kids. Oh, this is what I'd like when I meet the right person, but specifically, when we get married this will happen, and we'll try right away for a family, and once you have our first baby this will happen. Etc. One guy showed up 40 minutes late, wouldn't get off his phone, only grunted at me instead of talking, and then called me a fat ugly W American, when I said I wasn't interested. Another guy stood me up the first time, then when he did show up, looked nothing like his picture. He was rude to the wait staff, and kept talking to me about a show I'd said I'd never seen. He said he'd pay since he stood me up before, but then complained my waffle was expensive, it was $6 compared to his $10 entree. And then for the big finale, he tried to take me to Walmart. A boyfriend of a few days told me I should start gymnastics again after telling him I used to. I asked why and he responded with, "It'd help you lose weight." I was 110 pounds. Losing 200 pounds or whatever of dead weight boyfriend was definitely the better way to go. Good choice. He took me to McDonald's. That wasn't the problem, though, it was the way he acted like an a to the cashier. He also stopped by his mom's apartment to have a loud argument with her and his sister, so that was awkward. Another one turned out to be a huge racist. And there was the guy the first met at a bar who told me his plans to get rich by adding music to websites. He thought that being witty requires making fun of every person in his life. I had a girlfriend like this. I didn't realize that humor often came at others' expense until it started to be directed at me. Unfortunately, I had already wasted a few years on her. When he said it would be my fault if he killed himself, then spammed me with photos of himself with a rope around his neck. He was sitting down on the couch and just had the rope draped around his neck. I told him that I wasn't responsible for any decisions he made for himself and then blocked him. He straight up said to me, "I'm just an alpha, you know? A lot of people can't handle that. EU. I took an incorrect study about wolf families and turned it into my entire personality." He talked so much about himself I barely got any time to say anything, so it ended up with me just saying, "Oh, yeah, cool," and him not asking a single question about me. That guy really just took himself out on a date. Probably fucked himself that night. I'm an older single lady, 46. Telling me how you don't really like, or wanted, your kids and that your ex is crazy is really not helping your case. He was an acquaintance and I had known him for a year or so. Went on a date and he jokingly choked me and told me he had had like 16 girlfriend but had never dated anyone longer than 6 months. He told me if he wanted to, he could rape me. Then he asked me how I would respond. I said by calling the cops on him. He said, that would ruin my life and scar me forever. I have never noped out of a situation so fast in my life. Dude that was interested in me at one point was on again, off again with this other girl and he kept trying to get me to have dinner with him, hang out, whatever under the guise that he was going to break up with her soon and she doesn't need to know. No. On our first date, he picked me up with his baby in the backseat and an open beer in the cup holder. By faking an Irish accent. This guy literally spoke on the phone for ages while faking an Irish accent. I met up with him at a gig and he spoke in an Irish accent the whole time. I genuinely believed he was Irish up until a friend of his told me he was putting it on the whole time. This was in England, but just why? He stood outside the window of my dorm room at 3 a.m. yelling and doing karate moves on the dumpster. So yeah, dude fought a dumpster for me. He attempted to slay the mightiest beast he could find in order to display his prowess and impress you. How romantic. We were chatting and he seemed cool before saying, I'm basically the real-life version of BoJack Horseman. He then could not comprehend why that's not an attractive comparison, even after boasting he has seen the whole series 4 times. My role models include, Rick Sanchez, Eric Cartman, Sterling Archer, and Beavis and Butthead. Those guys are all just so cool. He made several racist comments about his coworkers. I called him out. He said he couldn't be racist because he's a feminist who loves women. Another complained about Vietnamese restaurants hiring Vietnamese people and how it ruined the atmosphere to hear them exist. Vietnamese people exists. Your date, Angery. This guy totally lost me on a date in college when he started talking about being on the basketball team and his social influence plus the money he somehow made being on the team, how much girls loved him. Ego for days for no reason equals a deal breaker. He told me he was really strong and if he wanted to, could probably beat me to death pretty easily, but never would because he wouldn't hit a girl, because he's a nice guy. He told me he was 250 plus years old and he was a werewolf. I laughed it off as I thought he couldn't be serious. He didn't think it was that funny. Well, you're either wrong or right, not saying which, but either way I'd best stay you involved. Ghosting me and then turning up again weeks later to see if I was still interested, when he was clearly just using that time to follow up with someone he liked more than me, but then he got dumped. I don't think every relationship requires an explicit breakup. If we've only been out a few times and you're not interested, not getting back to me gets the message across loud and clear. But keep in mind, doing it that way can burn the bridge. First date, he said he wanted to know if he could fit all the way inside of me out of the blue. We weren't talking about anything sexual before he had made that comment. Really? Jesus Christ. Very nice and seemingly normal if not slightly awkward guy decided to give me a t-shirt with his face on it after the first date. Ha ha ha, that's actually kinda hilarious. Staring at me in a very creepy way and making little kissy face at me while staring. Also, calling my breasts the twins. I get it that some women dig that, but it makes me super uncomfortable. Told him multiple times please don't stare or name my body parts but it never changed so I gave up and walked away. He was very controlling and had to be right about everything, even if he was legitimately misinformed. I think he just liked to hear himself talk as you could hardly ever get a word into a conversation with him. He would also try to fluff himself up by making fun of others, including his own friends. Overall, just came off as being very arrogant. There's a clear difference between being intelligent, confident, or being an arrogant A. Told me that if we became a couple, this was on the first date. That he expected sex whenever he wanted. I explained that I wasn't about to do that, and was countered with, well if I'm your boyfriend I deserve it. Noped the F out of that. Happy to say I'm now married to a wonderful person who's not a creep. Well, at least he had the courtesy to hold up the red flag where you couldn't possibly miss it. What AD? Most recently, not asking a single question about me. I'm not going to keep talking about you, dude. Took me back to his place where he hadn't taken the trash out for weeks, so the whole place smelled like actual garbage. I got out of there as fast as possible and still associate the strong smell of garbage with him, 12 years later. At a party whilst dancing with friends. Him, hey gorgeous, what are you drinking tonight? Me, cranberry juice and vodka. Him, so you must be on your period, cranberry juice is good for that. You have been visited by the Rippin' Roarin' Roddy of romance. You will be blessed with the love of your life joining you for a rippin' roarin' romantic time. But only if you comment, nice chops, pupper.